All right, guys, we got some agricultural leftovers for you. You've got two more short podcasts after this, but this is kind of a collection of other random things with agriculture that didn't really fit in with our movie or the earlier stuff that we did. So we're going to do that right here. And again, here's kind of the deal. Watching this, we are not going to have any more like tests or anything for our class, only for AP test preparation. So that's why we're here. So we're going to look at some of these leftovers and then get out of this one pretty quickly. You got a couple more podcasts that will come up throughout the week. So let's go ahead and start with the question. Let me move myself down here. Is how do humans alter the environment for farming purposes? How have human beings changed what we see in order to make agriculture happen? Well, there are a couple things kind of to go with that. First of all is irrigation. The fact that we need to get water to certain places to be able to grow crops that we might not be able to do otherwise, that there's not a natural water source right nearby. So I keep hearing, okay, that's right. So, and that can have consequences. If you remember from Sustainable, one of the big issues in the middle of our country is this aquifer that is under the surface of the earth with all this groundwater may be empty in a matter of decades. So we certainly change our environment, both what we can see and also our world, what is underneath by irrigation. However, we do increase the amount of land that is able to be farmed. Deforestation. It's a huge issue in South America, particularly in Brazil, where you're seeing Amazon rainforest being destroyed so that land can be farmed, so that those crops can be grown, sold, and cash generated for that. So that has, obviously that's a pro to be able to get more food out there to feed people, but obviously at the cost of biodiversity. We drain wetlands. So if we have an area like a swamp that needs to be converted into farmland, that certainly happens from place to place. And we also have this thing called terracing, which hopefully in your adventures into some of the agricultural styles you saw, but in these LDCs where there is maybe in a mountainous terrain, the ability to get flat land is dependent on the people to physically alter their environment to be able to grow, in particular, rice. So we're going to look more at that here in a second to see how that terracing works. Two other big terms with agriculture are classification terms that you may run into. One is called intensive agriculture, and the other is called extensive. So when we talk about what intensive agriculture is, just use and think about the word intense, right? This is demanding. There's a lot to it. There's a lot going on with it. Usually intensive agriculture involves greater inputs, meaning that you have to do more work and put more things in to be able to get your product out. A great example of that is market gardening, right? Fruit and vegetable growing. You can't roll a combine out there and just, pick it up like you would for wheat or corn or soy. You can't do that. So you have to have labor to be able to come and to physically pick those fruits and vegetables off the plant that they're growing. So that is an example of intensive agriculture, to where you have that intensive labor instead of letting a machine do that. Another example is creating the terraces to be able to grow rice. The rice intensive subsistence agriculture, wet rice dominant, is a great example of how it takes a lot of effort to make the terraces and then also to grow and harvest the rice. So this is kind of a picture of the wet rice dominant. You see the terraces. That literally this right here was a mountain, and what people did over time is they basically chipped away at the mountain to create these little flat areas to where the people will grow rice on them. Now, growing the rice is an interesting and laborious experience. And you can see the terraces and the houses built on the terraces. It's a beautiful setting, very intense work. I'm posting a video along with this podcast that will give you, and I think it's this video right here, that will show you how rice grows. It's really interesting. I'm not going to talk about it now so we can get through everything here. Check out that video, and also check out, here's a terraces as well, we'll go back, and also check out the impact that has on women who work in those industries. The physical challenges of rice farming are incredible. And in LDCs, we see that proportionally affect women more. So again, check that video out. There's a couple images in there that kind of, but it does show you the physical impact that this has. So again, intensive agriculture, you have to put a lot of labor or a lot of different supplies into something to be able to make it work. Here again is a picture of these terraces where communities also will be built on them. So again, the agriculture shapes the cultural landscape. You are not, like, these terraces would not be there if not for the need to create flat land to be able to grow crops on them and grow them at a consistent rate. So again, check out those two videos when it comes to intensive agriculture with wet rice. They're pretty good. Extensive agriculture, on the other hand, is looking at a type of agriculture that you really don't have to do a lot of physical work. You just kind of let it go and let it happen. Usually you have a large area of land that this will be on, but in general you have fewer inputs of capital and labor. A couple of examples of that: the pastoral nomadism, ranching, shifting cultivation. I already went through shifting cultivation and how it works, but you do have the labor of, chopping down and clearing the brush, but then you let the land and the earth do the work, right? Where it restores the soil and the nutrients, and then you grow the crops and harvest them. So this is more of a long-term thing. It's not as intense in the moment. It's extensive, right? That's the word, extensive agriculture. You have fewer inputs of capital and labor. Again, you don't have to have people physically growing, and you're letting the earth do the work, if you will. And here's kind of a picture of what shifting cultivation looks like after you burn an area. So again, it looks like, whoa, this looks like crap. But again, the idea is that you slash and burn, and then once this is cleared of all this debris, then you use all the nutrients which have come back into the soil, and then you're able to grow effective crops. And again, what allowed this to work and why can't it last? Well, it's not very sustainable because of the time it takes, the carbon footprint that maybe is left by it, the space that's needed as we continue to urbanize. Like, there's a lot of things there that might suggest that it is not a very sustainable practice. Pastoral nomadism, you see this again in LDCs where people will, basically you're talking about shepherds here, right? They're herding animals from place to place. We talked about in the migration unit the term transhumance, which is, the people taking their flocks up into the mountains during a point of time, and then down from the mountains when the weather gets a little colder. So again, it's extensive. You have a lot of capital here in terms of the animals, but you're just letting them go out there and eat on the grass and whatever else they may find in the areas that they're at. So again, it's basically you're letting them do the work and building it from there. Okay, so again, intensive, you put a lot into it. There's a lot of labor involved. Extensive, you basically, and think ranching, right? You're just letting those cows out into the field and they're just eating grass, right? That's what we're talking about with extensive. So we shift gears a little bit. We talk about maybe how agricultural land is organized and how it's organized throughout a space. Well, first thing we can mention is, how do people settle in rural areas? So this is very easy, right? It's a general idea. And we can break that down into dispersed, linear, and nucleated, which there's another word for that. Let me move myself here. There we go. So if you settle in an agriculture area, dispersed, right, spread out, right? We know what that word is. A linear setup, where say there's a country road and you only see people that are living like right on the road, we can call that a linear setup. Nucleated, this is another word for clustered. So now we're talking about agricultural towns and people that have clustered in that area, and eventually maybe that space builds up into a more urban area. But again, these are kind of the three ways we can define how people settle in agricultural areas. So those three words are ones that you might just want to remember. It could be a term that you can drop in an FRQ if need be. Now, once we settle agricultural land in this country land that no one has touched, how are those, let's say you're living here and then you have old Jim Bob down the road. How do you figure out where your land ends and Jim Bob's begins? Well, there are three ways that over time have been used to be able to do that. The first is called meets and bounds. And this one is very not technical at all. You're basically describing your land based on physical boundaries. So, for example, basically, like, and you use meets to describe like a short feature and a bound to describe a larger feature. So if I could say, you know, that my land ends at that, you know, at that one tree, right? And on the other tree, you know, on the other side of that tree, that's going to be your land. Well, we could call that a meet, right? It's a small feature, but it is the basically the border, right? It's the area that says, okay, on the other side of this, you're going to have that. Bounds are based on larger features. My land ends at the river, here at the Doe River, right? That's where I'm ending my territory, and then on the other side is where you have it. So meets and bounds is basically taking on what you see and using physical characteristics. You could describe them as antecedent boundaries, that they were there before the boundary, like the physical feature was there before the boundary was created. That's another way that you could look at that. So again, meets and bounds, very like not specific and technical way of defining where my land ends and where yours begins. Now, we saw this very early in the year. We talked about the township and range system. So if you're getting like a huge chunk of land that you have to divide into many areas, it might be wise to maybe divide it into a grid format. So the English start to do that once they start, and the American colonists, to be fair, once they start spreading to the west throughout North America. Now we're picking up all this land. How are we going to divide it? Well, the township and range system seems like the right way to go. And again, this is a way that you can organize land by saying, okay, in this grid format, we're going to just lay out a map and say just divide it here, irrespective of what boundaries are already there in terms of trees, rivers, things like that. We're just going to take this and geometrically divide it. So again, township and range is one way that was done. The last one, this is a more interesting one, I think. It's called the long lot system. It was developed by France. You saw this in North America and the places that the French colonized. So you're going to see this more in Quebec. You're also going to see it in one particular U.S. state we'll look at in a second. But what you want to do with long lot is it usually is built on a river. And when you have a river flowing in here, the having access to the river meant access to trade, access to movement. It was a big deal before you have any sort of like road system. So if you divide land, you want to make sure that everybody has a chance to get to the river. So what they do is they draw up land by not in boxes, these long rectilinear shapes, so that everyone had a good piece of land, but everyone also had access to the river. So in Louisiana, you can actually go into Google Maps and see the legacy of the long lot system and the way that land is drawn up. So you see here that I think we're just outside of New Orleans. Here we're on the Mississippi River. So you can see New Orleans is here, Baton Rouge is up there. So if we zoom in, you can see like how the way even the like side roads are, but the way that the land is broken up and delineated is that everybody has access to the Mississippi River. Whereas if I zoom out, you see long lot right here. If we get down to here, this is more township and range, right? So this is more of like, we've got the like geometric shapes, whereas long lot, you're going to get that when you're by a river. And that's where you have, again, that access to the waterway was so important to be able to move goods from point A to point B. So that's really the leftovers that we got. There's two other short, well, one is probably go the 15 minutes, but there's another one that'll be real short. But I'll be posting these videos alongside these podcasts because they're good to kind of see some other examples and see some of these ideas in agriculture flesh themselves out. So that's all we got. Be good. We'll see you soon.